If the Indiana Fever make this one move, they could completely destroy their future, and most fans don't even see it coming. Because right now, there's a huge illusion spreading across the WNBA. Fans are looking at Kelsey Mitchell and seeing 20 points per game. They're seeing highlights, scoring bursts, and big moments, and their conclusion feels obvious: pay her whatever it takes, lock her in, don't let her walk. Simple, right? But that's exactly where things get dangerous. Because this isn't just about keeping a scorer, this is about how this team is built moving forward, and more importantly, how it fits around Caitlin Clark, the player everything now revolves around. Here's the reality most people aren't talking about. In today's game, especially with a system built around speed, spacing, and constant movement, not every 20-point scorer brings the same value. Some players elevate the system, and others, even talented ones, can quietly slow it down. And when you're about to commit a massive contract, reportedly around $1.4 million, you're not just paying for production. You're locking in your identity. That one decision affects everything: your depth, your defense, your flexibility, your ability to build a complete roster around your core. And once that money is committed, there's no easy way back. So while fans are focused on what the Fever might lose, the front office has to focus on something much bigger: what they might be giving up. Because this isn't just a contract decision. It's a fork in the road. And whichever path they choose next could decide whether this team becomes a true contender or watches its biggest opportunity slip away before it even begins. Everyone thinks this decision is obvious, but that's exactly why it's so dangerous. Right now, a huge portion of the fanbase is looking at Kelsey Mitchell and seeing one thing: 20 points per game. And in today's game, that number carries weight. It feels like production you can't replace. It feels like letting her walk would be a massive mistake. And emotionally, that makes sense. She's been a key scorer for the Indiana Fever. She's had big moments. She's carried offensive stretches when the team needed it most. So naturally, fans are connecting those performances to value and pushing hard for the front office to lock her in long term. But here, where the illusion starts to break. Because not all 20-point scorers impact the game the same way. Some players generate points within the flow of an offense. Others need the offense to revolve around them. And when you don't separate those two, you end up overvaluing the wrong kind of production. That's what makes this situation tricky. Because on the surface, Mitchell's numbers suggest she's irreplaceable. But when you look deeper, how those points are created, how they affect spacing, how they influence ball movement, it becomes a completely different conversation. And that's the part most people aren't seeing. There's also another layer to this. The rise of Caitlin Clark changes everything. This is no longer a team searching for offense. It's a team built around one of the most ball-dominant, fast-paced creators in the league. And that kind of system demands very specific pieces around it. Not just scorers, but fit. So now the question is Mitchell talented? Is her style maximizing what this team is becoming? And once you start looking at it that way, the answer isn't as simple as the box score makes it seem. Because what looks like a no-brainer decision on the surface might actually be the exact move that holds this team back. This is where the conversation shifts completely, because now it's not about numbers, it's about fit. And when you really break it down, this is the biggest issue surrounding Kelsey Mitchell and the Indiana Fever. Because this team no longer needs a traditional shot creator. It needs pieces that maximize Caitlin Clark. That's a completely different requirement. Clark doesn't just run an offense, she controls it. She plays at a pace that forces defenses to react instantly. Quick decisions, fast ball movement, constant pressure. When everything is clicking, the defense doesn't even have time to set. That's when this team looks unstoppable. But the moment the ball sticks, everything changes. And that's where the tension starts to show. Mitchell's game has always been built around creating her own shot, isolation plays, extra dribbles, finding rhythm with the ball in her hands. And again, that's not a knock on her talent. That style works. It's why she's been able to score at such a high level. But next to Clark, it creates friction. Because while Clark is trying to speed the game up, those isolation possessions naturally slow it down. The spacing tightens, the movement stops, and what should be a flowing, unpredictable offense turns into something much easier to defend. You can actually see it happen in real time. The ball swings quickly when Clark is initiating. Players are cutting, relocating, getting open looks. But when the possession shifts into isolation, everything becomes more static. Defenders reset, help defense gets comfortable, the advantage disappears. And in today's game, that split-second difference matters a lot. There's also the defensive side of it. The Fever don't just need scoring, they need balance. Players who can move, rotate, and keep up with the pace on both ends. And when you're committing major money to one player, that player has to elevate the entire system, not just one part of it. That's the real question here. Not can Mitchell score, but does her style unlock the best version of this team? Because if the answer is no, then even great numbers can quietly become the thing holding everything back. This is where the decision becomes dangerous, because now we're not talking about basketball, we're talking about money. And specifically, a $1.4 million commitment to Kelsey Mitchell. At first, it doesn't sound like a problem. You pay your top scorer, you keep your core together, and you move forward. That's how most fans see it. Simple, safe. But in reality, it's anything but. Because in the modern WNBA, every dollar matters. The salary cap isn't flexible enough to hide mistakes, and one massive contract can quietly reshape your entire roster. And if the Indiana Fever commit that kind of money, they're not just paying for scoring, they're sacrificing options. And that's the trap. That $1.4 million doesn't exist in isolation. It comes at a cost. Depth disappears, role players become harder to retain, defensive specialists, players who don't always show up in the box score, suddenly become unaffordable. And those are exactly the players this team needs. Because building around Caitlin Clark isn't about stacking scorers. It's about surrounding her with shooters, defenders, and high-motor players who can keep up with her pace. The kind of players who fill gaps, not dominate possessions. But once that money is locked in, flexibility is gone. You're forced into tough decisions. Do you let key role players walk? Do you sacrifice defense for offense? Do you shorten your rotation just to keep one player? And over time, those decisions add up. What starts as one big signing can slowly turn into a top-heavy roster with no balance. Enough talent to compete on some nights, but not enough depth to survive a long season or a playoff run. And that's the real risk. Because championships aren't just built on star power anymore. They're built on fit, depth, and flexibility. And once you lose those, it's incredibly hard to get them back. So while paying Mitchell might feel like the safe move, it could actually be the one decision that limits everything else this team is trying to build. So if paying Kelsey Mitchell is the risky move, what's the smarter play? This is where things flip completely. Because the best teams today aren't built by stacking one expensive scorer, they're built by maximizing fit. And for the Indiana Fever, that means doing something most fans don't want to hear. Spreading that money out. Instead of committing $1.4 million to one player, you divide that same budget across multiple high-impact pieces. Not stars, not headline names, but players who fit perfectly around Caitlin Clark. And that's the key. Because Clark doesn't need another ball-dominant scorer next to her. She needs movement, she needs spacing, she needs teammates who react instantly when she creates an opening. Players who don't slow the game down, but accelerate it. That's where the 3-for-1 strategy comes in. You replace one high-usage scorer with multiple efficient contributors. A shooter who can knock down open looks without hesitation. A defender who can guard multiple positions and keep the energy high. A transition player who can run the floor and turn Clark's passes into easy points. Individually, they might not match Mitchell's scoring numbers, but collectively, they can outperform her impact. And more importantly, they create balance. Suddenly, the offense flows better, the defense improves, the rotation gets deeper, and instead of relying on one player to carry the load, you have multiple pieces contributing in different ways. That's how modern teams win. Not just talent, but synergy. And here's the part that makes this even more interesting. This approach doesn't just improve the present, it protects the future. You keep financial flexibility, you keep room to adjust, you avoid being locked into one decision that limits everything else. Of course, this isn't the easy path. It requires patience, it requires vision, and it requires the front office to ignore the noise from fans who just want to keep what feels familiar. But if executed correctly, this isn't just a replacement strategy. It's the move that could turn the Fever into a completely different and far more dangerous team. And this is where the strategy becomes real, because it's not just theory anymore, it's about who actually replaces Kelsey Mitchell. If the Indiana Fever go down this path, they're not looking for one star. They're looking for pieces that perfectly fit around Caitlin Clark. And the first name that stands out is Bridget Carleton. She's not flashy, she's not dominating headlines, but that's exactly why she works. Carleton is the type of player who thrives without needing the ball. She spaces the floor, knocks down open shots, and plays strong perimeter defense. And next to a playmaker like Clark, that role becomes even more valuable. Every time Clark draws attention, Carleton is the one ready to capitalize instantly. But that's just one piece. Because this system also needs speed, real game-breaking speed, and that's where Ray Burrell comes in. Burrell brings something completely different: athleticism, transition energy, the ability to run the floor and turn fast breaks into easy points. Her production hasn't always been consistent, but that's part of the opportunity. In the right system, especially one led by Clark, her impact could look completely different. And then there's the interior presence. Someone like Temi Fagbinal gives you exactly that: energy, rebounding, and the ability to finish plays without needing touches designed for her. She understands how to operate within a fast-paced system and provides the kind of balance this roster needs. Now here's the key. None of these players replace Mitchell individually, but together, they solve multiple problems at once. You get shooting, you get defense, you get speed, you get depth, and most importantly, you get players who fit the identity this team is trying to build. Because in today's game, it's not about replacing talent one for one. It's about building something that works better as a whole. And if Indiana gets this part right, they won't just replace Mitchell. They might end up upgrading the entire system. This is where everything starts to click, because this strategy doesn't just replace a player, it fixes multiple problems at once. When you move away from a single high-usage scorer like Kelsey Mitchell, you're not losing production, you're redistributing it in a way that actually fits the system. And for the Indiana Fever, that changes everything. First, the offense instantly becomes more fluid. Instead of possessions slowing down into isolation, the ball keeps moving. With Caitlin Clark running the show, every player on the floor becomes part of the action. Quick passes, constant motion, open shots. It creates a rhythm that's much harder for defenses to stop. And when multiple players are threats, defenses can't key in on just one option. Then there's spacing. Players like Bridget Carleton stretch the floor in ways that open everything up. Defenders are forced to stay honest, which gives Clark more room to operate and makes life easier for Aaliyah Boston inside. Suddenly, the entire offense feels less crowded and more dangerous. But it's not just about scoring. This approach dramatically improves defense. Instead of investing heavily in one offensive player, you now have multiple pieces who can guard, rotate, and bring energy on that end. That matters over a long season, because while scoring wins games, defense and depth win playoff series. And speaking of depth, that might be the biggest upgrade of all. A deeper rotation means fresher legs, fewer injuries, and more flexibility game to game. You're no longer relying on one player to carry the load every night. You have options, you have versatility, you can adjust based on matchups. That's how elite teams survive. And here's the part most people overlook. This strategy doesn't just make the team better, it makes it more sustainable. You're not locked into one massive contract. You still have room to adjust, improve, and evolve as the league changes. So while it might look like you're giving something up, in reality, you're building something much harder to beat. A team that's not just talented, but complete. But here, where this whole situation becomes really uncomfortable, because the smartest move might also be the most unpopular one. Letting Kelsey Mitchell walk. And that's not something fans want to hear. Because from the outside, it feels wrong. You don't just let a proven scorer leave. You don't move on from someone who's been a big part of your team's identity. And the moment that decision happens, there's going to be backlash, loud, emotional, and immediate. That part is guaranteed. But front offices don't get paid to make comfortable decisions. They get paid to make the right ones. And this is where things split. On one side, you have the emotional argument. Keep your star, reward loyalty, maintain continuity. It feels safe, it feels logical, and most importantly, it avoids criticism in the short term. On the other side, you have the long-term vision. Building around Caitlin Clark means making choices that maximize her impact, not just today, but for years to come. And sometimes, that means moving on from players who don't perfectly fit that vision, even if they're talented. That's the risk. Because if the Indiana Fever let Mitchell walk and things don't improve right away, the criticism will be relentless. Fans will question everything. Media narratives will turn fast. And suddenly, that smart decision starts looking like a mistake. At least in the moment. But here, what makes this so important? Some analysts believe that teams willing to make these tough, unpopular moves are usually the ones that build something sustainable. Not overnight success, but long-term dominance. Still, that's a belief, not a guarantee. And that's the gamble. Because this decision isn't just about one player, it's about direction. It's about whether this team is willing to fully commit to a new identity, even if it means short-term discomfort. And once that choice is made, there's no going back. So the real question is whether Mitchell deserves the contract. It's whether Indiana is willing to take the risk of building something bigger without her. Because that one decision could define everything that comes next. And now everything comes down to this one decision that could define the entire future of the Indiana Fever. Because there are really only two paths from here. The first one feels safe. You pay Kelsey Mitchell, you keep the scoring, you keep the familiarity, you avoid the backlash. On the surface, it looks like stability, it looks like continuity, and for a moment, it might even feel like the right move. But underneath that comfort, there's risk. A top-heavy roster, limited flexibility, a system that never fully unlocks what Caitlin Clark does best, and over time, that safe decision could quietly cap this team's ceiling. Good enough to compete, but not complete enough to win when it matters most. Then there's the second path. The harder one. You let Mitchell walk, you ignore the noise. You take that same money and build a deeper, faster, more balanced roster. A team designed specifically around Clark and Aaliyah Boston. A system built on movement, spacing, and trust, not isolation. And at first, it might not look pretty. There could be growing pains, early criticism, questions from fans and media, because when you make a move like that, you don't get immediate validation, you get doubt. But if it works, everything changes. You don't just have talent, you have identity. You don't just have scorers, you have a system. And instead of relying on one player to carry the load, you create a team that's harder to guard, harder to break, and built to last. That's the difference. Because this isn't just about one contract. It's about choosing between short-term comfort and long-term potential. And the truth is, we've seen this before in sports. The teams willing to make the uncomfortable decision, the one that doesn't make sense right away, are often the ones that end up ahead of everyone else. So now the question becomes simple. Do the Fever play it safe? Or do they take the risk that could change everything? Because whichever path they choose, they're not just deciding their roster. They're deciding their future.